Most filmmakers walk into investment meetings talking about the wrong things. They talk about the story, how much the film's going to cost, how much they need from that investor, and why the film matters to them. And then they wonder why no one actually invests in their film. This is the reason. It's because investors aren't asking about your film. They're asking about one thing. What happens to my money? And if you don't answer that correctly, you're not going to get financed. So in this video, I'm going to break down what private film investors actually care about and how to structure your pitch around it so that you can increase the likelihood of getting your film financed. Now, if you don't know me, my name's Alexi. I'm a feature film producer. I've produced over 12 features. And I work with filmmakers on financing and producing their projects, and all of those projects involve raising private equity. So if you want help financing and producing your films, click the link in the description below. Now let's get into it. One of the most common issues I see is that filmmakers think raising money is about convincing someone that their film is worth making. But that's only actually a small part of the overall picture. It is important. There is a part of persuading and selling and saying, yes, this is a film that's worthy of being made. That's only a part of it. It's actually more about showing that you understand risk and demonstrating that you've structured the project accordingly in order to minimize the risk to that particular financier. So once you understand that shift, investor conversations become much more straightforward. You actually enter those conversations with a lot more confidence, and your likelihood of getting investment actually increases dramatically. So let's go through it. When an investor is sitting across from you, they're not evaluating your film the way you are. They are thinking, where does my money go? What happens if this doesn't work? How do I get repaid? And how long does it take for me to get repaid? Most filmmakers answer none of these or only some of them. And what they typically do is they present the upside. So in their decks or in their pitches, they talk about, the major festival premiere that they're aiming for. They talk about 8-figure, North American sales that happened on similar films. They talk about the potential of worldwide streaming deals because now streamers are so involved. But the upside is not where the risk sits for the investor. And an experienced investor already knows that. What they're trying to understand is the other side, the downside. Now, there are a few reasons that this keeps happening in my experience working with filmmakers. And I've worked with over 100 filmmakers at this point, right? Firstly is filmmakers lead with the creative. That's how they've been trained to think about their work. And oftentimes when they're pitching to producers or distributors or sales agents, that is how you lead. But private investors are different. Second is that they avoid talking about risk and they avoid the downside because they think it weakens the pitch. They don't want to show what could go wrong. But in practice, that does the opposite. If you show the downside and you can demonstrate it, it shows that you understand what you're actually doing and what you're risking. The third is that most filmmakers don't fully understand film finance. So when questions come up from investors or financiers, they just don't know how to respond and they get vague, and then that just shatters confidence in them. And then finally, there's an assumption that investors and creatives think alike, or there's a misunderstanding, right? But they don't. Investors think way more in terms of exposure, probability, return, those types of ideas. Now, once you understand that, the shift actually becomes quite simple. There are 3 things that you need to focus on in order to show investors, demonstrate what they care about, and then get investment from them. So number 1, show that downside first. So before anything else, an investor wants to understand how exposed is my capital. So this is where a lot of film pitches fall apart, because this is where the conversation moves away from ideas and into actual numbers. And if you don't understand those numbers, or those numbers aren't built on strong foundations, they're going to crumble. So this is where things like comparables are handy, but also experience in the market, knowing what your films have sold for, knowing what other producers' films have sold for, and knowing what distributors pay. So a proper set of projections always includes a combination of real historical data from films that you've produced where possible. Now, if you're just starting out, you're not going to have those films. That's why it's good to work with someone who has that knowledge. Could be a producer, you work with a producer, an EP, someone like myself, whoever it is, someone that has that knowledge. Next is comparable films in the same genre and the same budget range. And you don't want to rely on just outliers because that's going to skew it. And then you need to demonstrate a clear pathway from gross revenue to net revenue. So, i.e., what's the amount it will make? But then once sales agents' costs and commissions are deducted, what's actually net for the investor? When that's done properly, an investor can now see, one, what a realistic outcome looks like, what a downside scenario looks like, and number three, what would need to happen for them to lose money, right? So what would need to play out for them to actually not make their money back? At that point, they're not guessing anymore, right? They are assessing the risk-reward profile of the film and matching it to their own risk-reward profile. Because once you fully are able to show what the downside is, and of course you demonstrate the upside, we're not saying don't demonstrate the upside. You want to show them what that potential is, but now they can understand the risk-reward. And in my experience, they're also determining how much capital they're actually willing to commit to that type of risk-reward profile. Because most investors, they tell you how much they're willing to invest, not the other way around. So you don't go to investors saying, I need 20K, and they give you 20K. They will decide because they're going to say how much capital they want to allocate to your risk reward profile. Number two, so emotion opens the door, but logic is the thing that gets the deal done. So private investors don't act like institutions in the sense that they don't come at it purely from spreadsheets. They come at it usually, or they start with a reason to care about the film. So that might be, number one, a relationship with the filmmakers. That's the most common I've seen over and over again. Number two, and we're going to talk about why that's important in a second. Number two is a connection to the subject matter. So we made a documentary about medicinal cannabis, and a lot of our investors came from that industry or that space. The third is a connection to your community. So you might be part of a community that those investors are also part of. I made a film called Paper Champions that was shot in Geelong, which is a regional city in Victoria, and all the investors came from that region because they wanted to support filmmakers from that area. So those emotional reasons, they're the things that get you into the conversation, but they're not the thing that gets the deal done. Once they're engaged, they need to move on to logic, which is, where does my money sit? Again, what's the downside? What's the timeline to get repaid? You need both of those things in order to successfully close. If you only rely on emotion, the conversation doesn't progress any further because there's no commercial reason for the investor to engage. Equally, if you only rely on logic, you never actually find the right investors to pitch to in the first place. Which kind of takes me to my next point, which is number three, and that is that your investors are already around you. So there is this common idea that you need to go out and find investors. Now, you do need to go out and network, or you do need to uncover investors, but in reality, most early capital comes from people who you already know. So what you don't typically need to do is go out and do cold outreach, because it typically comes from friends, family, or people in your professional network. Now, why is that? Well, it's the same with early stage startups. Most of their seed capital comes from friends, family, and network who want to see you succeed and who already have a degree of trust with you. But this leads us to a practical constraint, and that is that your film is usually sized by your network. So if your network can support 50K, that's your film. If it can support 200K, great, good for you. That's your film. Or at least it's the equity component of it, right? Because you may raise enough private where you can start adding tax incentives and distribution advances and build that finance up. But trying to jump straight to strangers writing large checks is, in my experience, where most filmmakers stall out, because it's just not common. It just doesn't happen in that way. So the producers, filmmakers who move forward, they start with what they can access. Then as their track record and their network grows, they're able to access larger pools of capital, including more institutional style funding. And from my own perspective, that's taken about 10 years to get to that point. And it's just been private. And at this point, I feel like it's now getting to more institutional. So there's one last thing that is worth discussing, and that's the following. The experience that the investor has matters as much, if not even more, than the financial outcome. And this is easy to misunderstand because a lot of filmmakers think that investors come back only because they've made money. That's part of it, but it's only part of it. What matters is the experience. Were they kept informed along the whole production process? Was communication with them clear? Did the producer handle problems professionally? Most investors going into a film investment understand the risk. They understand it's super high risk. They've probably heard so many stories of investors losing money on films. They know that. What they're evaluating is whether you're someone they want to work with again. So if you want to simplify all this, it comes down to 3 shifts. Number 1 is frame your film as an investment. Explain the structure, take them through it, and don't just pitch the idea. And really understand what you're talking about. If you can present numbers, but you don't understand how to explain them, that's a problem. Next, number 2, address that downside early. Show how the risk is managed before talking about upside. That should form the basis of the whole investment thesis that you're creating for the investor. And then third, lead with the emotion and then close with logic. So give them a reason to care. That's where you find your investors. Then a reason to trust you. Once you start approaching conversations this way, things will change quite quickly. You will become way more confident going into investor meetings. You're no longer going to be wasting time looking for dentists and doctors, and you're not asking someone simply to believe in your film. You're showing them that you understand what they're being asked to risk and why. And that is the point where your conversations with investors can turn into actual investment.